When my dad had his first stroke, it felt like the ground gave way beneath me. He was the pillar of our family, the guy everyone leaned on, and suddenly he was lying in a hospital bed with tubes in his arm, half his words slurred. I visited him every damn day, sat by his bed reading the paper, holding his hand, promising him everything was going to be okay. My wife Julia came a few times, but always with that polite smile, the kind that says, "I'd rather be anywhere else." My brother Mark, though? He played the grieving son like an actor auditioning for an Oscar. Always at Dad's side when the doctors came around, nodding gravely, shaking hands, looking like the perfect caretaker. But I know Mark. I've known him my whole life. He's a snake, and when snakes circle the dying, it's not out of love. Dad had money. Not billionaire money, but enough. The family house, some rental properties, stocks, the kind of wealth that makes people greedy. He never talked much about the will except to say, "Don't fight over it. I'll make sure you boys are taken care of." I believed him. Until the night I found Julia whispering in the kitchen with Mark, voices low but urgent. I froze in the hallway listening. "He's not going to fight it," Julia said, her voice sharp. "He's too soft. He'll accept whatever your dad writes." Mark snorted. "You don't know him like I do. He'll throw a fit if he doesn't get the house. That's why we need to make it look like Dad decided himself. The lawyer's already on board." My blood ran cold. Julia hissed, "Good. Because if I'm stuck in that shitty apartment another year, I'll lose my mind. Once the papers are signed, we're done pretending." Pretending. That word hit me like a bat to the head. Pretending what? That she loved me? That she was still my wife? I nearly stormed in right there, but I held back, heart slamming in my chest. Instead, I crept back to the bedroom, lay awake staring at the ceiling until she finally slipped in hours later, smelling faintly of whiskey. The next day I forgot my lunch and came home early. Julia wasn't there. Her car was gone. But Mark's truck? Parked down the street. I didn't need a genius to tell me what was happening, but I needed proof. I drove past, saw them through the curtains, sitting close, papers spread out on the coffee table. Not just papers. Legal documents. I clenched the wheel so tight my hands hurt. My own wife and my own brother, plotting in my father's living room while he fought for his life in a hospital bed. Plotting to rob me blind before the man was even in the ground. I wanted to kick the door in, tear the papers to shreds, drag them both out by the hair. But something in me said, wait. Let them think you're clueless. Let them think you're the fool. Gather evidence. Hit them when they least expect it. That night, Julia kissed me goodnight like nothing was wrong. And I smiled back, all teeth, already planning how I was going to bury them both. For the next week I played dumb, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done. Julia smiled, kissed me, asked about work, and I answered like a good husband while my insides boiled. Mark called me brother, like he hadn't been plotting to gut me alive. I wanted to rip their masks off every second, but I forced myself to wait. Patience. That's what Dad would have told me, patience wins wars. So I started digging. First stop, Dad's lawyer, Mr. Fletcher. He'd been handling family business since I was a kid. I dropped by his office just to check in, and his secretary gave me that tight little smile lawyers' staff always wear. "Mr. Fletcher's in a meeting." I said I'd wait. 40 minutes later he finally came out, eyes widening when he saw me. "Didn't expect you, son," he said, voice a little too bright. "Everything all right?" I shrugged. "Just worried about Dad. Thought I'd see how things are shaping up." He coughed, shuffled papers, wouldn't meet my eyes. That told me enough. Something was happening behind closed doors and I wasn't supposed to know. That night I went through Julia's desk. She kept a drawer for bills and boring stuff, always locked. She must have thought I never noticed where she hid the key bottom of her jewelry box. Inside I found receipts, bank statements, and tucked under them, a copy of a draft will. My name was on it, sure, but for scraps. Mark was listed as primary heir, the house, the rentals, the stocks. Me. A modest trust fund. And at the bottom, Julia's signature as a witness. I sat there staring at the paper, my pulse pounding in my ears. My wife wasn't just fucking my brother, she was signing away my future with him. I shoved the papers back, locked the drawer, hid the key exactly where I'd found it. My hands shook the whole time. The next day Chris, my only real friend left, came over. He saw my face and said, "Spit it out." I told him everything. His jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth would crack. "You can't let this slide, man. They're setting you up to look like the greedy son so nobody questions when you get cut out." "I know," I whispered. "But I need proof they're conspiring. Real proof. Otherwise it's just my word against theirs." So we got clever. Chris worked IT for a security firm. He helped me install a tiny camera in Dad's living room, disguised as a smoke detector. Another one in the kitchen. If Julia and Mark were meeting there plotting, I'd have every word. 2 nights later the feed lit up on my phone. There they were, side by side at Dad's table, sipping wine. Julia leaned close, whispering, "Once the will's finalized, we'll push him out gently. He won't fight. He never does." Mark smirked, his arm brushing hers. "And when it's ours, you'll finally have what you deserve." Her hand slid across his. My stomach turned to stone. I saved the clip, backed it up 6 different ways. That was my smoking gun. But then Julia's voice dropped lower, colder. "What about him? You know he'll lose it if he finds out." Mark's smirk widened. "Then we make sure he looks unstable. Dad already worries about him. A few stories, a few staged scenes, he won't stand a chance." I nearly crushed my phone in my fist. Not only were they stealing my inheritance, they were planning to paint me as unfit, crazy, the black sheep. I sat there in the dark, watching my wife and my brother toast to my ruin, and I swore to myself, when the will was read, I wouldn't just fight back. I'd burn their whole fucking scheme to the ground. Once I had that video, I couldn't unsee it. Julia's hand on my brother's, the way they smiled at the thought of me being unstable. Every second she laughed with me, kissed me, curled up in bed beside me, it all felt like theater. But now the mask was slipping and I was done being their audience. Chris and I spent hours plotting. "You've got the video," he said, pacing my kitchen. "That's enough to blow them up." But I shook my head. "They'll scream it's fake, doctored. Mark will drag Dad's name through the mud, claim I hacked something. I need more. I need them admitting it over and over until no one can deny it." So I doubled down. I added 2 more cameras. One in the study where Dad kept his files, another hidden in the lamp in the guest room. Then I waited. And it didn't take long. 3 nights later there they were again. Julia's voice, calm and sharp. "As soon as Fletcher finalizes, we'll get him to sign. If he refuses, we'll tell him about the gambling." My chest went tight. "Gambling? I don't gamble." Mark chuckled, swirling his wine. "He doesn't, but people will believe it. Everyone knows he's stressed. We'll leave a few receipts, maybe a betting slip. By the time anyone asks questions, it won't matter." I sat in my car outside, watching on my phone, my fists trembling. They weren't just robbing me, they were fabricating a whole version of me to bury me alive. The next morning Julia made me pancakes, kissed my cheek, asked if I'd checked the mail. I stared at her smile, thinking about how she'd laughed while Mark planned to destroy me. My fork bent in my hand. I wanted to throw the plate at the wall, to scream, "I know everything." But I didn't. I forced a smile, kissed her forehead and whispered, "Thanks, babe," all while my chest burned with hatred. A week later Fletcher called. "We'll be reading the will next month," he said. "Just family, of course." His tone was clipped, almost rehearsed. I hung up and sat in silence, my whole body shaking. That was their stage, their big reveal. But they weren't the only ones preparing. Chris helped me splice together the footage, edit it clean. Every smile, every whisper, every toast to my downfall, we cut it into a neat little highlight reel. We burned copies to 3 different flash drives, hid them in separate spots. Still, something gnawed at me. I wanted more than just exposure. I wanted to break them the way they planned to break me. I started digging through Julia's emails. It took nights of pretending to sleep, slipping into her office at 3 a.m., but eventually I cracked her laptop password. What I found made me choke on my own breath. She wasn't just plotting with Mark about the will. She'd been moving money. Quiet transfers from our joint account into one in her name. Tens of thousands gone, siphoned slowly over months. Notes in the memos, travel, furniture, gifts. And one transfer marked simply with an initial, M. Mark. I sat there in the glow of the laptop, my skin crawling. They weren't planning to share Dad's fortune. Julia was already funneling money to him. They'd been bleeding me dry right under my nose. I copied every file, every receipt, every dirty transaction. By dawn I had a folder thick enough to crush both of them. And as the sun came up, I stood at the window watching Julia sip her coffee on the porch, pretending to be my wife. And all I could think was, smile while you can. Because when that will is read, I'll make sure your empire of lies comes crashing down. The day of the will reading felt like walking into an execution chamber. My palms were sweating through my shirt, my heart pounding so hard I thought Fletcher's secretary could hear it echoing off the walls. She led us into the conference room. Long polished table, glasses of water, thick folders stacked neatly in front of each chair. Julia squeezed my hand like a dutiful wife, nails digging just a little too deep, while Mark clapped me on the back like nothing was wrong. My stomach twisted, but I forced a grin. Dad was there too, wheeled in by a nurse. He looked frail, smaller than I'd ever seen him, but his eyes were sharp, darting around the room like he knew something ugly was about to happen. "No fighting," he croaked, his voice still shaky from the stroke. "That's all I ask." I swallowed, nodded, but inside I was screaming, "Wait till you see Dad." Fletcher started reading, his voice dry, professional. The first lines were harmless. Funeral arrangements, debts to be settled. Then he cleared his throat and moved on to the inheritance. "To my son Mark, I leave the family home, all rental properties and majority stock holdings." I heard Julia exhale slowly beside me, like she'd just won the lottery. Mark's smug little smirk spread across his face, and I wanted to smash it off with my fist. Fletcher kept going, "To my son David, I leave a modest trust, to be managed at the discretion of the executor." My name echoed in the air like a curse. Modest trust. Managed at someone else's discretion. It was the exact draft I'd seen in Julia's desk. They'd pulled it off. Julia leaned close, whispering, "It's for the best, babe. Less stress for you." Her words were gasoline on fire. I sat still, jaw clenched, waiting for Fletcher to finish. When he finally set the papers down and said, "This concludes the reading," I stood. "Actually," I said, pulling the flash drive from my pocket. "There's one more clause you forgot." Everyone looked up, confused. Fletcher frowned. "Excuse me?" I plugged the drive into the projector before he could stop me. The screen on the wall flickered to life, and suddenly the room filled with Julia's voice. "Once the will's finalized, we'll push him out gently. He won't fight. He never does." Gasp. Dad's head snapped toward Julia. She went pale, shaking her head violently. This isn't real." But the video rolled on. Mark's voice, "And when it's ours, you'll finally have what you deserve." Then her hand sliding over his, "Their toast. To our future." The room erupted. Dad slammed his fist on the armrest, face red. "You filthy traitors," he rasped. Mark jumped to his feet, shouting, "This is fake. He edited this." But Fletcher was frozen, staring at the footage, his mouth hanging open. I wasn't done. I pulled a folder from my jacket, slapped it onto the table. Bank statements spilled out, Julia's transfers, the money funneled to Mark. "Fake." I snarled. "Explain this." "My wife moving money to my brother while you both plotted to strip me of everything." Julia's mask cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she babbled, "It's not what it looks like, I was just—" Dad cut her off, his voice like thunder despite the rasp. "Don't you dare speak." His eyes blazed, fury I'd never seen in him before. "You disgrace me. Both of you." Mark tried again. "Dad, listen, he's twisting." But Dad barked, "Enough. I'll have the will redrawn today. You'll get nothing. Not a goddamn cent." The silence that followed was suffocating. Julia sobbed into her hands, Mark stood frozen, and I just sat back in my chair, heart hammering, finally breathing for the first time in months. But deep down I knew this wasn't over. People like Julia and Mark don't crawl away quietly. They'd fight, claw, and bleed before letting go of the power they thought they'd stolen. And I had to be ready for whatever came next. The room broke into chaos after Dad's outburst. Julia sobbing, Mark shouting, Fletcher fumbling with his glasses. The nurse wheeled Dad out, muttering that his blood pressure was spiking, and the second the door closed, Mark turned on me, eyes wild. "You think you're clever? You think this little stunt means anything? I'll sue you for defamation, I'll bury you in court." Julia, streaked in mascara, grabbed his arm like a drowning woman. "Please just stop, maybe we can fix this." But he shook her off, his face twisted with rage. I stood slowly, slid the second flash drive across the table toward Fletcher. "Backup copy," I said. "Another's with my lawyer, and another with a journalist who'd love to cover a greedy heir trying to rob his own brother." Mark's jaw tightened. Julia looked like she might vomit. "You wouldn't," he spat. I leaned in close so only they could hear. "Try me. You wanted to paint me as unstable? Now the world sees exactly what you are." For once Mark had no comeback. He just glared, fists clenched, teeth grinding. Julia broke first, whispering, "Please David, we can work this out. You still have me." I laughed so hard it echoed in the wood-paneled room. "Have you? You've been funneling my money to him for months. You're not my wife, Julia. You're his accomplice." Her face crumpled like I'd ripped the last mask off. Chris walked in then, he'd been waiting outside, and clapped me on the shoulder. "Cops are here," he said casually. Julia gasped. "Cops?" I smirked. "Yeah. You didn't think moving tens of thousands out of joint accounts wouldn't raise red flags, did you? Fraud is still a crime." 2 officers entered, quiet but firm. One addressed Fletcher, who pointed straight at the pile of documents. Mark backed toward the wall, palms out. "This is bullshit, you can't arrest us for family drama." But when they read out the charges, fraud, conspiracy to defraud, potential elder abuse, his face drained of color. Julia collapsed into her chair, shaking her head, whispering, "No, no, this isn't happening." As they were let out, Mark twisted in the officer's grip and spat at me. "You'll regret this, you little bastard. You've got nothing without us." I stepped closer, met his eyes, and said evenly, "No, Mark. I got that. I got the truth. And all you've got left is each other." They were dragged out into the hallway, still shouting. Fletcher rubbed his temples, muttering, "Jesus Christ, I've never seen a family implode like this." Chris just grinned at me. "Told you patience wins wars." That night I sat by Dad's bed, showed him the folder of evidence. His hand shook as he turned the pages, his jaw clenched. When he finished, he looked at me with eyes full of both sorrow and pride. "I raised 2 sons," he said, voice heavy, "but only one man. For the first time in months I slept like a rock. Julia and Mark were finished. Their scheme was ashes, their names ruined. But deep down I knew people like them don't just fade away. They'd be back, somehow, clawing for what they thought the world owed them. And when they did, I'd be ready to crush them all over again." The fallout came fast and brutal. Within a week, the story broke in the local paper. Businessman's son accused of fraud and attempted inheritance grab. The article laid everything out. The hidden transfers, the video of Julia and Mark whispering over wine, even Fletcher's complicity. The public ate it up. Strangers pointed when I walked into stores, whispering about the brother who exposed the scam. For once in my life, I wasn't the quiet son standing in Mark's shadow, I was the man who'd gutted him in front of everyone. Julia tried calling at first, leaving voicemails soaked with tears. "David," I panicked. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I only wanted us to have security. I still love you." Each message sounded more desperate than the last, but I never picked up. Well, she'd sold me out for square footage and stock certificates. Love doesn't leave you holding a knife in your back while she laughs with your brother. Mark, of course, went down swinging. He hired lawyers, screamed conspiracy, claimed I fabricated everything. But the footage, the bank records, the witnesses, they buried him. His so-called friends stopped answering his calls, and when he showed up drunk at Dad's place one night, shouting through the gate, the cops dragged him away in cuffs. He looked at me with wild, bloodshot eyes, spitting, "This isn't over," as they shoved him into the cruiser. But it was. Dad had the will redrafted. Clean, simple, the estate split evenly with Julia's name scrubbed off completely. He told me later, "I want fairness, not poison." I nodded, though deep down I knew fairness had already been scorched out of our family. When the divorce papers came through, Julia didn't fight. She signed quick, like she couldn't stand to look at me anymore. Rumor had it she left town, moved 2 states away, working some dead-end admin job. I didn't care enough to check. She was a ghost the moment I saw her hand slide across Mark's in that video. As for Mark, last I heard he was couch surfing, broke, blacklisted. Nobody trusts a snake once its fangs are shown. I should have felt sorry for him, but all I felt was relief. Relief that I'd finally ripped his mask off for everyone to see. Chris and I cracked beers on my porch one night, the smoke from the grill curling into the summer sky. He raised his bottle. "To patience," he said. I smirked, clinking mine against his. "To revenge." And as the night settled, I realized something. They thought they could strip me of everything, my inheritance, my dignity, even my sanity. But all they did was hand me proof of who they really were. And once you see someone's true face, you can never unsee it. Julia lost her marriage. Mark lost his legacy. I lost the illusion that blood and vows meant loyalty. But what I gained was sharper clarity, strength, and the fire to never let anyone write me out of my own story again. So when people ask if I regret it, if exposing them was worth the wreckage, I tell them the truth. Some families build empires. Mine tried to build a coffin. I just made sure they climbed into it first. I thought the storm had finally passed, but people like Julia and Mark don't just disappear quietly. A month after the court filings, after Dad rewrote the will, after I signed the divorce papers, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name in messy handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You may have won the first round, but you don't know everything." No signature, but I knew that sloppy scrawl anywhere. "Mark." I almost laughed. He was broke, disgraced, living off scraps, yet still trying to scare me like we were kids in the backyard. But then another envelope showed up, this time with photos. Grainy shots of me at work, walking to my car, grabbing groceries. Someone was following me. Chris came over when I showed him. He frowned, shaking his head. He's spiraling, man. He's got nothing left but resentment. I clenched my jaw. Let him spiral. If he wants to stalk me, I'll have cops drag him off again. But at night I found myself checking the locks twice, keeping the baseball bat by the bed. Julia wasn't quiet either. She emailed me from a burner account, long rants about how I twisted everything and forced her into Mark's arms. At the end she wrote, "You think you're free but you'll never be rid of me." I didn't reply. I just dragged the messages into a folder labeled evidence. Dad saw what was happening and called me over one evening. He sat in his study, frail but still sharp, a glass of whiskey in his trembling hand. "Son," he said, "you did what I couldn't. You exposed them. But men like Mark, like Julia, they don't stop. They gnaw at the edges until you bleed." His eyes bored into mine. "So you make sure they can never touch you again." The next week I did exactly that. I met with Fletcher, this time with my own lawyer, and we redrew not just Dad's will but my own estate planning. Ironclad clauses, no loopholes, no way for Julia or Mark to ever claw their way back in. I also gave every shred of evidence, videos, bank records, emails, to a journalist Chris knew. Within days the story blew up bigger than ever. Headlines screamed, "Local heir caught in family betrayal scheme." TV anchors dissected the footage. Julia's crocodile tears became memes. Mark's smug smirk as he toasted, "To our future," was played on loop with commentators calling him the definition of greed. And just like that, they weren't just disgraced in our town, they were disgraced everywhere. Julia tried calling again. I didn't answer. Mark sent another letter, this one barely legible, ranting about setting the record straight and taking back what's his. I handed it straight to the cops. For the first time in my life, I wasn't scared of them anymore. I was done being the quiet son, the gullible husband. They wanted me erased, written out, forgotten. Instead, I'd carved my story so deep into the record books that even if they lived another 100 years, they'd never crawl out from under it. Months rolled by and the dust finally started to settle. Julia vanished completely, her last desperate emails bounced back from a dead account. Word around town was she moved out west, working some low-end admin job, living in a rented room. She went from sipping wine in my father's house, plotting her deserved future, to eating takeout alone in a one-bedroom. I didn't feel sorry. She made her bed. Mark, though, he refused to fade. He tried suing me twice, once for defamation, once for emotional damages. Both got laughed out of court. He showed up drunk at Dad's gate again, shouting slurred threats until the cops hauled him off. That was the last time I saw him in person. After that, he became a ghost, broke, couch surfing, blacklisted by anyone with a shred of money. Dad passed 6 months later, peacefully in his sleep holding my hand. His last words to me were simple, "Don't let them break you. You're stronger than both of them combined." At the funeral, Julia didn't dare show her face. Mark stood at the back of the crowd, unshaven, hollow-eyed. Our eyes met once, and for the first time I didn't see a rival. I saw a ruined man. He left before the coffin touched the ground. The inheritance came through smoothly. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I fixed up Dad's house, started renting out the properties, built something stable with Chris's help. Life was quiet, but it was mine, untainted, uncompromised. Sometimes at night I'd sit on the porch, whiskey in hand, and think about everything I lost. A wife who was never mine, a brother who'd rather bleed me than stand beside me, a childhood belief that family meant safety. All of that was dead. But in its place I found something sharper. Truth. Independence. Strength I didn't know I had until they tried to strip me bare. People still ask me if I regret it. If exposing them, torching my marriage and my brother's reputation, was worth the wreckage. And every time I give the same answer, they thought they were writing me out of the story. Instead, I wrote the ending myself. Julia lost her marriage. Mark lost his future. And me? I walked out of the fire with scars but still standing. Stronger. Wiser. Untouchable. Because sometimes blood doesn't make family and vows don't make love. Sometimes the only way to survive is to burn the lies to ash and start again. And I did.